Hello and welcome to the Leadership Edge. I am your host, Ted Gorski. Leadership Edge focuses on those topics that affect leaders on a day-to-day basis. I'm your host, Ted Gorski, and what we do is we analyze those various topics that affect leaders to make them more effective in what they do. And today's show is actually a new format for Mr. Ted here, and we're going to do actually a book. We actually have a fabulous book that we're going to talk about, and I have the author with me. Here is the fabulous book, and I have with me the author of this book, insightful player, Chrissy Carew, who, by the way, is also a master certified coach. And we've talked about coaching in one of our segments, and she also happens to be one of the inductees into the International Coach Federation Hall of Fame. Very prestigious. So what we have today is Chrissy wrote this fabulous book, and we're going to talk to her about it. And it's going to be really excellent because it's going to talk about some leadership lessons that she's learned from NFL players. So Chrissy, welcome to the Leadership Edge.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here, Ted.
So tell us about, what is Insightful Player?
Insightful Player is a book, but it's also an initiative. It's like a bold movement of hope that showcases inspiring NFL players to empower kids. It's the book, it's stories, and it's programs.
So how many players did you interview for this book? I think before in the show you mentioned there's another book coming?
Yes, for this book I have 32 players,
okay.
And I have, I think, 49 players altogether now.
Now, in this book here that I've just held up, Insightful Player, tell us, who are some players that are in this version of the book?
For this version, I would say Devin McCourty is from the Patriots.
Patriots.
Yeah, I think I should just kind of talk about players that are local, right?
Yeah.
And we have Kyle Arrington.
Wow, another one.
Yep. And I just interviewed Matthew Slater, but that's for the second book.
Okay.
We have, do you remember Jarvis Green?
I
He
do.
played for us. And Benjamin Watson, Heath Evans. We have Steve Nelson, Steve Grogan, Andre Tippett, and we have Roger Staubach.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. He was my very first player. We have. Do you want me to tell you more?
Yeah. Well, tell me what inspired you to write this book.
Well, what inspired me was my concern for kids.
Okay.
And that NFL, not just NFL role models, but role models were falling down left and right. And so I wanted to get more positive stories out to the world.
Okay.
And so I thought, hey, I love football. I grew up in football. My dad was a football coach and a teacher. He used sports as a way to help kids build character and learn valuable life skills. So he really inspired me.
Yeah.
And also, when I was like 14 years old, I went to this peaceful demonstration against demonstrations that Jim Nantz, do you remember Jim Nantz?
The football player.
The late Jim Nantz, ran in Boston, and there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people there. And his message was so positive, and it had an impact on me. And he was so accessible to all the audience. And I went up to him as a little kid, and I shook his hand, and I said, "You've inspired me." And he says, "Well, you stay inspired." And I knew that very day that I wanted somehow to inspire people when I grew up.
Sure.
And he had a huge impact on me. So that was another thing that inspired this, because his message was so positive. And at that time, in the late 60s, things were crazy. You know? You remember? Are you old enough?
I'm old enough. Hey. Producer Bill usually picks on me like that. So you mentioned these are lessons for kids.
Yeah.
For the players. So tell us why that was so important for you to have that in the book.
Well, I mean, I really think humanity's at a crossroads of transformation and obliteration. And I also believe in the power of the human spirit, and I believe in the goodness of humanity. And I think it's the kids. If we pour more resources, more support, more love, coaching, tools, positive programs to kids, they're going to be the ones that take humanity to the next level, to unimaginable heights. But they desperately need us, and we're also wrapped up in our own lives. And I was so guilty of that myself, that we don't realize how bad it is for these kids, and so I did it for the kids.
So you mentioned you have these players. Now, how do you choose your players, and how do you get in contact with them to be part of this book?
Well, the first player I got was Roger Staubach.
Wow.
I had,
The Hall of Famer.
Yes,
Roger
Hall of
Staubach.
Famer, yes. I had called them and spoke to his assistant and said I'd like to, write an empowering story about him that's inspirational and for kids. And she said, "Why don't you send me a pitch? Let me know what it's all about, and we'll see if he wants to do it." But I had spent 2 years trying to work with the NFL, so I was so discouraged before that. And I wanted to work with NFL players to become better role models on and off the field.
Sure.
And like you and me, we both know the impact coaching has on people, and I knew that their stats would skyrocket from the coaching. But anyway, so I had 2 years of feeling discouraged. So when I called to follow up on Roger and say, I just want to see if he let me write an inspiring story about him, she said, "Okay, yes, he wants to do it. How's July 6th?" I almost fell off my chair because
Wow.
I got so many no's before then, Ted.
Yeah.
So that was really exciting. And so I set up a telephone interview with him.
Well, what I liked about your book, Chrissy, is that the chapters on the players are relatively short,
Yes.
but they're pretty laser in
Right.
terms of, the lessons that they're providing. And what I also liked at the end of each chapter, you kind of have like a summary of bullet points
Right.
from each one. So it makes it a very easy read. Was that kind of your focus in the format of this, was to really get laser in the message that these players were providing?
Yes, I wanted to get laser, and I also created those guiding principles because I wanted, I envisioned kids hanging them up on their refrigerator or on the bulletin board. And that was the coach in me, by the way,
Yeah.
that created those
Like
guiding
a football
principles.
coach, you put the game plan up. or
Yeah,
something.
yeah. So, and they're all very coachable moments, each guiding principle. Like, for example, Rashid Davis, who played for the Bears and the Lions, one of his guiding principles is learn how to play a bad hand very well.
Interesting.
So kids could look at that and that are having a bad hand and say, wait a minute, what does that mean? How do I do that?
Yeah.
And that's and they read a story and they'll see more how to do that.
Well, what I read, several of the players talked about failure
Yes.
and kind of rebounding from failure.
Right.
And that seemed like a common theme for a lot of these players.
Absolutely. Yeah, I only wanted to work with players that would be vulnerable and share mistakes they made, missteps, discouragements times, and what they gained from that.
Yeah.
What they gained from that. Because kids look at these players as gods, that they have them way up on the pedestal, and they don't realize that these players are just like them.
Yeah.
And the players, by the way, want the kids to realize that too.
Well, there was a story about Jericho Cottree.
Yes.
I think that was him.
Yeah.
Who was actually, he mentioned that he was in gangs earlier.
He was, Jericho
And
Cottree.
he got himself out of that.
He did. He was lucky. Most kids that are in gangs aren't allowed to get out.
Yeah.
But because he was such a gifted athlete, the gang members said, okay. And at the same time, one of his friends was killed in a car accident. And it just kind of changed everything for him. And now, as an adult and an NFL player, he and his wife, Mercedes, spend a lot of time working in inner cities, helping kids that are in gangs to get out.
Wow, that's
Yeah,
fabulous.
it's beautiful.
Now, you mentioned, earlier that, you had some obstacles with this book. Can you tell us more about some of those obstacles you faced?
Yes. I remember, a lot of the teams would look at me and say, who are you? Number one, you're a woman. Right? Number two, what experience do you have in the NFL? How do I know that your story is going to be grammatically correct, professional?
Sure.
I don't know. It was just too complicated for them. But once I got Roger, that made a difference. But before that, when I first started with the vision of Insightful Player, I remember speaking to one of the teams and said, I have this vision, these players are just going to really inspire kids and, share their story, including mistakes. And I just know that these kids are going to really, 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 really be affected in a positive way. What do you think? He says, I don't really think it's any big deal. I don't know what you're getting so excited about.
Really?
And I remember I hung up the phone, and I work in my home. I have a home office, and I went to bed. I was so discouraged. I was devastated. Wow. And the next morning, I woke up filled with you know that expression, yeah, in vinegar.
Yes, yes. Technical term.
And I just went to town. It inspired the heck out of me. And a lot of teams slammed the doors on my faces. But once, you know, Roger was in, that really helped. And once I started getting some momentum of other players, then players started recommending other players to me. And then I was shocked. Agents started calling me, would you please interview my player?
Agents.
Yeah. And some of them I had to turn away because they weren't, you know, they weren't good role models.
So do you have like a certain criteria as you're, you know, looking at players and, you know, like you said, agents were calling you?
Right.
Did you have like a certain criteria that you said either yes, they'll be in the book, or no?
Yeah, they have to live an integrity-based life now. They don't have to, and if they didn't before, that's great. I mean, because that's where they can help the kids show the gap. If they've learned from that and grown wise from that, if they have an open heart and want to help, and if they care about kids, they have to really want to care about kids.
Yeah.
And to make that the reason why they're saying yes to Insightful Player Initiative. It's not just the book, because they really believe kids need them.
So you said integrity-based life.
Right.
What else besides working with the kids was important to you with the integrity-based life? Because I like that term.
Right.
Sounds like an awesome term. You know, what does that mean?
They had values. They lived by their values. They had strong character. They'd admit their mistakes. You know, they're honest. You know, they're working on themselves. They're very committed to their own development, and that was really important for me.
This sounds like themes from previous shows. We've talked about these. We've talked about alignment
and spirituality.
Spirituality, which brings up was an interesting point. What I noticed going through was a lot of the players really talked about how faith in God was important to them.
That's true.
Can you tell us more about, you know, what you learned in that arena?
Well, you know, Insightful Player, I feel like, has always been my legacy work. And I very much feel still that we're in a spiritual crisis in the world. And so I wanted the undertone of Insightful Player to be spiritual, not religious, but spiritual. And I wanted to represent players from all faiths, all degrees of spirituality. But most of my players are Christian. I am a Christian. And I also want to, you know, interview more players that have other beliefs.
Sure.
So so every kid could relate to a certain player regardless of where they are right now. So the faith was really a big turning point for a lot of my players, because some of them had horrific beginnings. And like Rashid Davis, he had to duck for cover in his own home because bullets were flying on his street, and his father was murdered at McDonald's when he was 8 years old. I don't know how a little kid survives that.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, Billy Miller, he had to walk over dead bodies in his neighborhood. I mean, there were so many stories that I was like, I didn't even know that world existed.
Yeah.
I'm like, we got to get these out there, because these stories existed for them. There are many kids that are living this, you know, or in some cases worse.
Sure.
So it was they were down on their knees and they surrendered. They didn't know what to do next, you know. And on Rashid's case, he felt discouraged. He was angry. It was right after he graduated from high school. He felt aimless, because before that, his role models were gang members.
Wow.
You know? So he finally just got down on his knees, and he had this insight to turn his life over to Christ.
Now, you mention a lot of these players, and you bring up, you know, Rashid. Was there or is there a particular player story that, you know, besides the ones you've mentioned, that's really stuck with you when you wrote this?
Yes, I have many, Ted, many. One of the first players I interviewed, his name is Blaze Winter, and he played many years in the NFL. And he had, what do you call that, cleft palate?
Cleft palate, yeah.
So people put him in classes for the mentally disabled. And not only was he bullied by kids, he was bullied by adults.
Really?
And his father beat him up all the time.
Oh.
And he had, his saving grace was his great-grandmother and his mother. And And he found sports. Sports kept him out of trouble because a kid that's beaten down like that is going to be a very angry child, and he was. Understandably so, right? And so he let the aggression out in sports and became very gifted in particular football. And when it came time for him to graduate from high school, and his coach would not help him get into colleges. So his mother grabbed him, took him out of school, and they went around the country visiting colleges, and he got into Syracuse. And I mean, his story about how horrific, and how many surgeries he had to have, and I mean, there are other stories. Another one lost an arm to cancer, and you know, he had to learn how to live. All his identity was caught up in his athletic ability, and he was very handsome in his good looks. But now he was a handicapped person, and he had a really hard time with that. But finally learned how to accept it, and he's one of the happiest people I've ever known. And he's out working with the handicap, and he's out inspiring other people to reach their dreams. His name is Kevin Riley. And he's amazing. He's the only person I've ever known that gets a standing ovation every time he speaks.
No kidding.
Every time.
Wow.
Yeah.
So since we're on the leadership edge, you know, one of the things we really focus here is, you know, leadership lessons that we can give to our, you know, our audience. So from the book and from the various stories, what are like 2 or 3, you know, leadership lessons and tips that we can pass on to our viewing audience?
From the players?
From the players that could really, you know, help them in their daily life and daily activities.
Okay. One of the things that really jumps out at me, actually for every single one of my players, is they all had an amazing ability to expand their perspective. They didn't get locked into beliefs that didn't serve them. They became acutely aware, like when they made a mistake, they're like, okay, wait a minute, what can I learn from this? Or if life hit them really hard, it was because they had so many obstacles, they became so wise so young. And if life hit them hard with something, they would pause. And they would feel it, and it would be horrible, whatever the situation may be. Like Kevin with his arm, losing his arm, Rashid, you know, losing his dad. And they would pause and say, okay, I believe, because of my faith, I believe something good will come from this. So instead of waiting, like, I know something will come good of this someday, I'm going to start asking myself some questions today. What can come of good to this now? And they all have this insatiable appetite to develop. And they all are humble. They all know they're in leadership roles today, on and off the field. Yeah. And one of the things that they are very inclusive, they're awesome leaders because they listen and they care. They're so willing to be vulnerable and share any kind of any mishaps or mistakes they make, they admit it. And they're okay admitting it. They don't have to work up courage to do that. They just see the importance of that to model that for these young people that that idolize them.
And when I hear you talk, I'm hearing resiliency here.
Oh my God!
You know, they seem like they all have that.
Yeah, very resilient.
So they take the lessons that happen to them, bounce back from them, and learn from them. More importantly.
Yes.
And great leaders are able to do that.
Absolutely, very.
So it sounds like all these players did that.
Yes.
Now you mentioned also that you had some school assembly in New Jersey.
Yes.
Can you tell us, first of all, what was it, and what was it all about?
Well, at the end of each player's story is I have the guiding principles of each player. So a teacher got my book in Williamstown High School in New Jersey.
So it's a high school teacher?
Yes, high school teacher. And she was a special needs high school teacher.
Okay.
So she had her students read the players' stories and then pick one of the guiding principles at the end of each story and write an essay on it. The program was adopt an insightful player guiding principle.
Okay.
And they would choose one they were drawn to. The teacher didn't assign them. Yeah.
Okay.
And they would write that essay. Okay, why do they want to adopt it? How will it help them now? How will it help them later? And where are they going to begin? And the kids got so into it, the teacher called me and asked me to come and bring one of my players.
Now, how many kids was involved in this?
Oh gosh, I'm not good with numbers. This particular class, there was like maybe 30 to 50. How's that? That's a wide range.
Okay.
Okay. And so Kevin Riley, the one that lost his arm, they wanted him. They picked him.
No kidding.
Yeah, and so we came to the school, and Kevin and I were amazed. The guiding principles were all over the walls, everywhere. And the kids kept saying, oh, these are mine, these are mine, these are mine. And they really did really well with these essays. And so we did a private session for them, and then we did a big school assembly, which they came to as well. And that's where I want to spend most of my time now, is the hands-on with the kids and have my players with me, to deliver their powerful messages. And then, so what we're doing now is, and I did some follow-up coaching to the kids. So
great.
All Insightful Player programs are going to be preceded with coaching for the teachers, as well as follow-up coaching for the kids, and we have a bunch of programs for teachers after the assembly. We want to stay in these kids' lives forever.
So it sounds like you're taking this project to a new level now.
Yes.
It sounds like you now want to do some kind of hands-on
absolutely.
And pass this on down to the kids.
Yes, yes.
So is that kind of, from what you learned from this assembly, it sounds like some of these principles that we're talking about in this book are really resonating with these kids.
They're really resonating with these kids. It's really cool. It's really, really cool.
Now, you mentioned book 2 is being worked on.
Yes.
So when do you project that to be out and ready and finished? And
well, I'm only having players come right now that reach out to me, because my focus is getting sponsors. So I have many 15, 16 chapters written, maybe more, maybe 17.
Yes.
Already ready to go. And so I want to get sponsors to pay for the programs to get out to the schools. I would like to go to schools across the country.
Why not New Hampshire?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot of schools in New Hampshire.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be great.
So from this assembly, what did you take from that, and what the kids are really, what's resonating with them? What particular principle is really resonating that you noticed?
Well, I think if you give kids something that is interesting, they're going to dive into it, full, what's that expression?
Full boat?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
There was a sinker one, but anyway.
Yeah, well, whatever.
Yeah.
Producer Bill, do you have anything? Thanks.
Make it interesting. Also, they're craving these stories of hope, because a lot of them are having tough times. Even kids in good situations, every human being goes through struggles.
Sure.
And it's the community and the camaraderie that these kids got even closer to each other.
Yes.
And their confidence grew. And their visions. It's all about, I want to help kids become visionaries. That's a huge part of Insightful Player. And the kids started seeing a brighter future for themselves.
So in kind of, we're coming low on time here and kind of wrapping up the show. What advice would you give to our audience? Maybe there's some children watching who are interested, or maybe the parents. What are some advice would you give them that you learned from your research in this book?
Oh gosh, read with your kids. There's a lot of good books out there. Read with your kids and then discuss it. Like a lot of us as adults, we belong to book clubs, right?
Sure. Get
your children into book clubs with their peers and let them talk about it. Really find ways to empower your child. Often, like if a kid's getting in trouble, our blinders go on when that same kid does great things. So we have to always put the antennas up to look at what they're doing right and acknowledge the heck out of them, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Chris, I want to thank you for being on today's show. And let me say this about the book and wrapping up. It was a very easy read, so I think for the kids, they could easily pick up and grab the messages in this book, and I think it's absolutely fabulous. So I want to thank you for being on today's show and sharing your fabulous experiences.
Thank you, Ted, for having me.
It's our pleasure. So if you would like any more information on what we discussed on today's show, You can go to Chrissy's website, which is www.insightfulplayer, that's singular.com. So insightfulplayer.com. And of course, if there's anything we can do for your leadership skills and needs, feel free to reach us at www.getyouredge.com. So again, my name is Ted Gorski. Thanks for tuning in to this week's show. See you next time.